Hey guys, I'm recording this after I've recorded the other video. I just realized I forgot to mention the opener very quickly. The opener for Arcane is you should be doing a precast evocate like 5 seconds before the pull, and then you do Arcane Blast Orb. Normally you would have to do another Arcane Blast to get to 4 charges because evocate does not give us an Arcane charge anymore. However, there's a bug on PTR 2 days before the patch hits where evocate is still granting us a charge. If this bug still exists, then your opener is evocate Arcane Orb, evocate Arcane Blast into Orb, like you precast Arcane Blast Orb. If the bug does not exist and evocate does not give us a charge, then you evocate Arcane Blast Orb, Arcane Blast, and then you do your burst. Just to clear that up. Thank you. Hey guys, welcome to my Arcane Mage Part 2 guide, 10.1.5. In this part, we're going to be talking about rotation and just kind of going through things and answering some of the main questions that people talk about when referencing the rotation. So to break it down, I have this little word pad thing here. I split it into like the sequence of things and then this little note here at the end that I'll talk about later because I don't want to overcomplicate things at the start. So this is generally the sequence you'll be playing at. You should kind of think of it once again as a big burn and a mini burn, and then there's a little filler at the end. So to start off, we're going to be evocating, right? We're going to get our Siphon Storm buff up that we've talked about. Remember, evocate gives you intellect buff. After evocate is done, we're going to be pressing Radiant Spark into Nether Tempest, and then we're going to be pressing Surge into Barrage into Touch of the Magi. So to break down why we do this, we obviously want to apply Radiant Spark first because it's a damage buff and we want that active during our burst. It lasts long enough, and yeah, we don't want to be spending like time casting in it. Nether Tempest, we apply our dot, same reason, right? We don't want to cast it with all our cooldowns up, so we can do it a bit of ahead of time. And then we start casting our Surge. Once that Surge is done, you're in like blast mode, right? So the Surge will be the first hit in Radiant Spark, which means Surge will consume Radiant Spark 0 and apply Radiant Spark 1. Or to say it in a different word, it applies the first vulnerability. After that first vulnerability is applied, we're going to Barrage into Touch of the Magi. Barrage will consume Vulnerability 1 and apply Vulnerability 2. And now we're going to put Touch of the Magi before Barrage lands. And the idea here is that when we Barrage into Touch, the Barrage is in travel time, right? So it's going to land in our Touch of the Magi, but because we Touch of the Magi after the Barrage, we're going to regenerate our Arcane charges back. So that's really good. Once we apply Touch of the Magi, so what's our situation? We have all our buffs up, we've applied Radiant Spark, we're on Vulnerability 2 now. Remember, there's up to Vulnerability 4. So we want to consume Vulnerability 2, 3, and 4, right? The best way to do that as a co-rotation is to press 3 Arcane Blasts, right? So we're going to Touch of the Magi and then Arcane Blast, Arcane Blast, Arcane Blast. Just 3 Arcane Blasts to consume the Radiant Spark vulnerability. Once you're done with the Radiant Spark, you're going to enter the co-rotation, which is just, for the remainder of Touch of the Magi, basically. Our co-rotation, if you recall, is basically just Clear Casting Missiles, Blast to consume Nether Precision buff. Well, Forgy, what if I don't have Clear Casting Missile? You press the only other button you have, Arcane Blast. So, your Arcane Missiles with Clear Casting, get the buff of Nether Precision, and then use 2 Arcane Blasts to consume the Nether Precision. And if you have more missiles, you press 1, get the buff again, press 2 Blast, Blast. So your rotation is just Missile, Blast, Missile, Blast, Missile, Blast. And note, when I say missile, obviously I only mean Clear Casting missiles, not regular missiles. Never touch regular missiles. Now, min-max moment. I'm going to throw these in here and now. Towards the end of the Touch of the Magi, that's when you want to be using your Presence of Mind. The rule with Presence of Mind, the idea behind it is our Presence of Mind doesn't actually, if you recall, increase the number of Arcane Blasts we get. It merely makes one instant cast. Now, the benefit of an instant cast spell is that the damage happens at the start of the global cooldown as opposed to the end of the global cooldown. So you're basically just getting a fast forward on 1 second, right, of your damage hit. Now, that's good for the end of Touch of the Magi. So typically that's why we want to cast it at the end of the Touch of the Magi. So towards the very end, in the last like 1 and something global cooldowns, so when you have like 1 point something global cooldowns, you press Touch of the Magi. You press Presence of Mind, Arcane Blast. A more simpler version technically is to cast it when there's less than 1 global cooldowns. But the reason we cast it when it's slightly more than 1, so 1 point something global cooldowns, because Presence of Mind has 2 charges, and the cooldown doesn't start ticking until the second charge is consumed. That's why I want to be pressing it a little bit earlier, just so they can sync up with your mini burn. I'll cover this more in part 3. But anyway, yeah. Once our Touch of the Magi phase is over, we're going to be basically still having Arcane Surge up, so we're just going to be going through our Arcane Surge with our co-rotation still, right? Missile, Blast, Blast, Missile, Blast, Blast, Missile, Blast, Blast. Now, we're going to keep doing this until our buff called Siphon Storm is over. What will happen when you're actually playing is that your Arcane Surge will expire, and then thanks to our Arcane Surge expiring, our 4-piece kicks in, and our 4-piece gives us a damage buff after Arcane Surge expires. It's like a 25% damage buff. So we're going to have that buff, and we're still going to keep blasting, because 25% damage is quite powerful still. It's like our second best cooldown. However, that buff lasts for quite a while, but Siphon Storm will end eventually. Siphon Storm is 12% intellect. A good time to press Shifting Power is once Siphon Storm is over. However, min-max moment. Don't worry about this if you're just learning basics. If you have Impetus active, it's worth to keep going to finish Impetus unless your Touch of the Magi is 15-second cooldown remaining. That's already too late. Ideally, you want to be pressing Shifting Power when Touch of the Magi is like, let's say 16, 17, 18 seconds. Usually 17, I believe, because you need to press like 2 buttons and then Touch of the Magi. So 17-second touch, you should already be shifting, even if you have Impetus up. But if you have Impetus and Siphon Storm is over, you can keep going with that Impetus a little bit until 17 seconds of touch or until Impetus finishes. Okay, out of the min-max moment now. After the Shifting Power, we're going to go into our mini burn, right? So it's very similar to the big burn that we just did, but it's slightly different because we don't have Surge this time. Same thing, we're going to apply Radiant Spark, Nether Tempest, and then Barrage Touch. So what you'll notice is it's just Surge is missing, right? The implication of this is that Barrage is what consumes Radiant Spark 0 and applies Vulnerability 1, right? So we're going to Barrage Touch. Now we've applied Vulnerability 1 after this, which means that now we have to consume Vulnerability 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? Well, Forgy, how do we consume those? Guess what? Arcane Blast 4 times this time instead of 3. So you're going to Arcane Blast 4 times to finish off your Spark. And then we're back into Touch phase again, which is just the same thing. Missile, Blast, Blast. Missile, Blast, Blast. Missile, Blast, Blast. And we're going to keep doing that until once again Touch of the Magi is almost over. 1.1 GCDs or under 1 GCDs, you press Presence of Mind, Arcane Blast, Arcane Blast. And then we're going to go into our filler phase. Right. In our filler phase, it's basically the same thing. You're going to Missile, Blast, Blast, Missile, Blast, Blast. But there are opportunities to weave in things like Nether Tempest, maybe Barrage if you're running low on mana. And where and when you weave these in just comes down to your mana. Ideally, you don't want to cast Barrage or our Nether Tempest outside of our cooldowns unless you're But obviously, if you're and you don't have Evocate up, you're going to have to do something, right? So we can do those instead. If you do end up barraging, make sure you utilize your Arcane Orb because that gives you 2 charges instantly pretty much. So good way to get some charges back. We don't want to be casting those 0 charge Arcane Blasts. You can kind of do some shenanigans like Nether Tempest applications, Ice Nova. You can even break the rule of Missile, Blast, Blast. If you have no mana and you have 2 clear casting missiles, just cast 2 of them in a row if you cannot cast Blast. That's fine as well. But it requires a little bit of tinkering. That'll be more in depth in the next part. Now, we're going to keep doing this until our Evocate is ready, or Touch of the Magi has 6 seconds remaining on its cooldown. Now, why one or the other? If you're already and Evocate is ready, press Evocate, right? Very important. You don't want to be whenever you can, just press Evocate. However, if your mana is healthy, why Evocate early and make our Siphon Storm expire early, right? Instead, what we can do is we can keep going until there's roughly 6 to 8 seconds of our Touch of the Magi window cooldown, and then you can Evocate, and then yeah. The only downside about this is that when you do this, your next evocate will be like slightly delayed, right? Then compared to if you were pressing it on cooldown. So make sure you're a bit aware of what your mana is going to be. Like for example, in double lust, your mana is quite rough. Whereas in single lust, your mana is still a little bit rough, but not the worst thing ever. So maybe, if you foresee yourself having mana issues, or you have mana issues with single lust because of your gear, what's going on with the fight or whatever, maybe pressing evocate more on cooldown is more worthwhile than to milk these extra few seconds of Siphon Storm. So yeah, keep those things in mind. But obviously, if a fight's ending and you're not going to get a second lust, your 5-minute lust, then you can delay for a little bit more. Now, as for trinkets, gem uses, this is a big topic of discussion and people will tell you many different things. The recommended optimal gameplay is that you gem with your barrage. So you gem barrage and you want to make that as a macro, and you basically just, that's the barrage, that's the macro that you press over here. And then your trinket, Iridius Fragment in this case, right, our current here, you're going to be pressing with Arcane Blast as a macro after Touch of the Magi. So you're going to press your Gem Barrage macro, then you're going to Touch of the Magi, and then you're going to press your Arcane Blast Iridius Fragment macro, or Iridius Fragment Arcane Blast macro. That is the optimal way to do it. However, if you want to save one button and lose out on like 0.1% DPS, it's literally like 200 DPS, just make your Arcane Blast button your Gem macro, right? So you add Gem, Trinket, and Arcane Blast all together, and you press that after Touch of the Magi. I will post that macro in the description because there's a little bit of technicality going on. So yeah. The very last thing I want to talk about is Arcane Missile clipping. So there's this thing that we currently do with Arcane Missiles where we don't actually want to full channel Arcane Missiles all the time. Most of the time you don't. The reason is basically just because Arcane Missiles damage is quite low and it's longer than a global cooldown. So why cast it? Why keep casting it when you can cast another ability instead? So typically when you're above 30% mana, you want to clip your Arcane Missiles by casting Arcane Blast as soon as possible. So this means when you're doing your Missiles Blast, you press your Missiles button, and then you spamming your Blast button. And the moment the GCD is over and the GCD is ready and it lets you cast again, you're going to be wanting to press Arcane Blast again. You do not cancel, like you do not press Missiles and then escape or cancel cast or stop cast or any weird things. Because obviously, why do that when you're still in the GCD, right? We want to wait till the GCD is over and then you just press Blast. So once again, the easiest way to do this is just press your Missiles and then you press your Blast button. You don't wait for the channel to end, just press your Blast button. You keep doing this until about 30% mana. Once you're below 30% mana, you stop doing this and you let Missile fully channel. Main reason is because Missile is obviously free, Arcane Blast is not, so we don't want to be cancelling our Missiles and increasing our mana cost per second, if that makes sense. This rule applies, by the way, the Missile casting applies whether you're in Touch of the Magi or outside Touch of the Magi, in cooldowns, out of cooldown, doesn't matter. It's agnostic to all that. That's the rule, 30% or more. You clip, if not, then if you're below 30%, you don't clip. Some of the most common and disastrous mistakes for Arcane that I'll talk about is people mismanaging their cooldowns. It's very important that you memorize these sequences, especially with Radiant Spark. Like, for example, people will do mistakes like accidentally press like Missiles while they have Radiant Spark up. That will literally delete your entire Radiant Spark because each hit of Missiles will remove one stack of vulnerability. This is a war crime. Do not do this. Other things are like barraging too often, right? Like I talked about, barrage is the absolute last thing you want to do outside of these two. But yeah. And just kind of like delaying cooldowns, right? Oftentimes people will do stuff like, oh, they won't press their Radiant Spark to start their cooldowns until Touch of the Magi is ready, which is not correct, right? Because this right here, the Radiant Spark Nano Tempest Surge, takes like 5 seconds roughly. Well, 3 to 5 seconds depending on whether you have double lust or not. And similar stuff with like Evocate, right? People like hold Evocate or something until like Touch is ready because they want that power. But whenever you're doing this, you're like stalling your cooldowns very, very significantly. Arcane's damage is all about getting your cooldowns off cooldown and you're just playing that cycle over and over and over again. Your cooldown cycle should be roughly a minute 20 seconds. It's more like a minute and like 18 seconds. The very low cooldown is like 117 with shifting power, but there's a bit of cooldown wastage due to like Arcane Surge cast time and stuff. But yeah, not too much into that. But yeah, just get your cooldowns off. Don't delay. Delaying is typically bad. There's like very little exceptions where you can delay, but typically don't delay. I hope this part has made sense so far. I'll be covering with a video example so you can get a visual representation in the next part. So make sure you watch that, please. Yeah, I'll see you in that one. If you have any questions or anything confusing, make sure you leave a comment below, ask the question away, and I'll do my best to explain it again.